VR or ultra-wide monitor? Which one should I choose? If you are asking this question, you've definitely come to the right place. For the past few years, I've raced with multiple VR headsets, including the PSVR 2, Meta Quest 1, Quest 2, and now the Quest 3. Definitely one of the most popular VR headsets out there. And more recently, I've added the 57-inch Samsung Odyssey Neo G9 to my setup, which is easily one of the most extreme ultra-wide monitor you can get. So in this video, I'm going to share my own experience to compare VR and ultra-wide across things like pricing and hidden cost, how much space you really need, how easy they are to set up, the level of comfort especially for long sessions, and most importantly, the level of immersion. By the end of this video, you should have a much clearer idea of which setup makes more sense for you. And just so we're clear, everything in this video was bought with my own money. There's no sponsorship whatsoever. And if you want to support the channel, please use my discount code and fill the links down in the description below. Let's start with the pricing. There are so many VR headsets and monitors out there. I will just use my Quest 3 as an example. Mine is the 512GB version, which comes in at $499 USD. For PC VR gaming, although you can use it straight out of the box, there are two upgrades I highly recommend to maximize comfort and gaming performance. First, you need a better head strap. The default one is just so uncomfortable to use and it puts a lot of pressure on your face and it's not very stable. I bought this Bobo VR strap, which is night and day difference. There are also a lot of other third-party brands out there which generally cost somewhere between $30 to $100. And the second upgrade is that you need a dedicated router.
Router in American English versus router in British English. And
ideally a Wi-Fi 6E router. Mine is the TP-Link Archer AXE75 Wi-Fi 6E router, which is currently around $120. And this has significantly improved the image quality and the latency. I will talk more about that later. So realistically speaking, you are looking at around $600 to $700 for a proper VR setup. Now let's look at ultra-wide. My monitor is the 57-inch Samsung Odyssey Neo G9, which retails for around $1,600. And this is definitely a high-end model. If you're okay sacrificing a bit of vertical field of view, you can drop down to a 49-inch ultra-wide, which can go as low as $550, or something mid-range like the 49-inch version of the Samsung Odyssey Neo G9, which sits about $900. So straight away, VR already looks more affordable. But that's not even the full story. With VR, because you're in a completely isolated environment, you don't even need to spend money on fancy wheels, button boxes, dashboards, or RGB lighting, as you can't see them anyway. And you don't even need external speakers, as the Quest 3 integrated speakers are pretty decent. But with ultra-wide, at a bare minimum, you need to buy a monitor stand. For example, an entry-level integrated monitor mounting bracket from TrackRacer is about $129, or $279 if you go for a standalone monitor stand. So when you factor everything in, from a cost perspective, VR clearly wins. When I first got into sim racing, space was actually my biggest problem. Beyond convincing my wife that all these expensive sim racing gears were actually investments, I also had to justify why I was about to take over half of the home office. And that's exactly why I started with VR. With VR, you don't need a monitor, and without a monitor, you just need a space for the rig itself. A standard aluminum profile rig is usually under 65 cm wide and about 150 cm long if you include the seat. It's actually smaller than most of the office desks. So you can pretty much place the rig anywhere, like pushing it against the wall, hiding it in an unused corner, or like I did back then, tucking it under a shelf so no space is wasted. Even if you're adding a 3-degree freedom motion system, you're only adding another 15 to 20 cm in width, still very manageable. Now let's compare to an ultra-wide. When I added the 57-inch monitor, space instantly became a problem. That thing is over 1.3 meters wide. It basically doubles the footprint of an aluminum rig. Even a smaller 49-inch ultra-wide is still over 1.1 meters wide, making a small room even more cramped. Then you've got to figure out where to put it. You can mount it directly to the rig, but that usually means the monitor wobbles when the force feedback kicks in. The better option is a standalone monitor stand, like the one I'm using here, but that takes up even more floor space. I even tried getting clever at one point. I placed the rig next to my desk and I shared my work monitor using a long monitor arm. So whenever I want to race, I just swing the monitor over, and when I finish, I just swing it back for everyday use. But having to move the monitor every single time just made me lazy, which slowly killed my motivation to jump in and race. So when you add everything up, the conclusion is pretty clear. If you're tight on space, VR is probably a better choice. Now let's talk about how to set them up. Setting up an ultrawide is pretty straightforward, just to make sure you've got someone to help you lift and mount the monitor onto the stand. When I say find someone to help you, I mean it. Don't try to do it solo, it's heavy and the panel is fragile. So yeah, step one is actually make a friend first. I'm just kidding.
Excuse me, is anyone sitting there?
No.
Anyone sitting there?
No.
Is anyone sitting there?
No?
You got no friends, man.
Once the monitor is mounted, it's simple. Just to connect your PC with a display port or HDMI cable, and that's pretty much all the physical setup. Then comes the part that actually takes time, fine-tuning your field of view or FOV. A correct FOV makes a huge difference. It affects your sense of speed, how accurately you can hit corner apexes, and just the level of overall immersion. There are FOV calculators out there where you input things like your distance to the screen, monitor size, monitor curvature, and then it gives you a suggested FOV degree. But I find them a bit hit and miss, so I usually just tweak it by eye. It can be a bit tedious because you need to fine-tune it for each car, and different sim titles all have slightly different camera settings. But once dialed in, you don't need to adjust it again. Moving on to VR, the setting up process is a bit different. First, you need to connect the VR headset to your PC. Depending on what headset you're using, you can either go wired or wireless connection. For my Quest 3, I highly recommend going wireless by running virtual desktop. It gives you fantastic image quality, ultra low latency, and it's just super intuitive to use. You can use your VR controllers to operate your PC exactly as if you were using a keyboard and a mouse. But to really maximize the wireless performance, you'd better set up a dedicated router for your Quest 3. The logic here is pretty simple. A dedicated router gives your Quest 3 its own private connection, so it's not competing with all the phones, iPads, and other devices in your house. And ideally, the router should be Wi-Fi 6E. This is because 6E unlocks the 6 GHz band, which is basically the best connection the Quest 3 can use. That extra bandwidth lets your PC push a lot more data to the headset, meaning noticeably better image quality without increasing latency. There's also no need to bother with a Wi-Fi 7, since Quest 3 only supports 6E, you won't actually get any performance advantage from it. I know that sounds like you need to become a network engineer, but to be fair, it's not that complicated. There are plenty of YouTube tutorials out there, and the virtual desktop Discord is super helpful. They walk you through everything step by step. So from a setting up process perspective, I think ultrawide is easier and less intimidating. After all, it's just connecting a monitor. So what about the level of comfort? Let's start with VR. In short, it's not the most comfortable way to race. First, you've got a headset strapped to your face, and it's not light enough that you can forget it's there. After about 10 minutes, you start to feel it warming up, and when you take it off after a session, there are usually red pressure marks stamped across your face and forehead. It's not a deal breaker, but yeah, it's nowhere near as comfortable as wearing nothing at all. Thankfully, there are plenty of third-party head straps that can make a big difference to comfort, and some even come with a little fan to help keep things cool. Even so, long stint in VR is still a challenge. Usually after about an hour, I notice my eyes start to feel dry and it gets pretty hot. The worst part is when something starts itching on my face, I can't even scratch it properly. And then there's the biggest hurdle, motion sickness. This happens because of what is called a sensory mismatch. Your eyes are telling your brain that you are pulling huge G-forces at 150 miles an hour, while your inner ear knows you're actually sitting completely still in an aluminum rig. The good news is that you can train your brain to adapt. I got hit pretty badly with the motion sickness when I first started using VR, but I built up my tolerance by racing for just 5 or 10 minutes at a time, and stopping the exact second I felt weird. After a few sessions, my brain adapted, and now I can race for hours, totally nausea-free. Despite all the downsides in comfort, VR does have one hidden benefit. It can actually reduce eye strain. I know that sounds a bit counterintuitive because the screens are sitting so close to your eyes. But eye strain isn't just about distance, it's also about focus. In VR, you get true depth perception, so your eyes are constantly looking at different depth, more like they do in the real world. And compared to staring at one flat screen the whole time, that can actually feel more relaxing for your eyes. Moving on to ultrawide. It feels no different from using a normal monitor in your day-to-day life. You just jump in the seat, look at the screen, and go. That means you can race for hours, the exact same way you sit in front of your work monitor all day. The only difference is that now you are chasing lap times instead of chasing deadlines. And unlike a VR, there's no headset on your face, no weight on your head, no heat build up, and best of all, you can scratch anywhere you want, whenever you want. The only downside is that after a very long stint, you might start to feel some eye fatigue or stiff neck. That is because your eyes are locked onto a screen at a fixed distance, and your neck can end up staying in the same position for too long. But to be fair, that usually only becomes noticeable during marathon sessions. Yeah, so looking at all of this, it's pretty clear that VR loses in almost every aspect when it comes to pure physical comfort. So why bother with the VR at all? Because the level of immersion is absolutely unmatched. And once you experience that, it's very hard to go back. This is VR. Whoa! Before we dive into VR, let's start with the ultrawide monitor. Compared to a standard 16:9 aspect ratio screen, the biggest advantage of an ultrawide is a much wider field of view. Personally, I set my FOV in iRacing at 118 degrees, which gives you a noticeable boost to immersion compared to a regular TV or monitor. That said, 118 degrees is still a long way from real life, where your natural field of view is over 200 degrees. And because an ultrawide doesn't fully cover your peripheral vision, the sense of speed can feel slightly off. On top of that, it is still just a two-dimensional flat screen, so you don't get true depth perception. That means judging distance, like finding the exact corner apex or spotting your breaking point, is a little less intuitive. Of course, you can absolutely learn it with the time, but it never feels quite as natural as it does in a fully immersive setup. And because you are still sitting in an open room, it is also pretty easy to get distracted by people, pets, or whatever else is going on around you. VR, on the other hand, is a completely different story. Because VR headset renders two separate images to each eye, you get a true depth perception. And that changes everything. Speed feels more intuitive, judging the distance between the car ahead feels more natural, and the braking for the apex starts to feel less like calculation and more like instinct. I still remember the first time I tried a VR. The car in front of me slammed on brakes, and it felt so real I genuinely thought I was going to crash. From that moment on, I understood why people love it so much. But VR generally has a narrower field of view than ultrawide. My Quest 3 supports up to 110 degrees, which is less than the ultrawide's 118 degree. But in practice, it never feels restrictive because you can simply turn your head to check mirrors and a blind spot, just like a real car. And funny enough, that 110 degree field of view is actually close to what you see inside a real racing helmet. Even the weight of the headset strapped to your head adds to that feeling of being in the cockpit. But that level of immersion comes with the trade-offs. Once you fully cut off from the real world, even basic things like reaching for buttons, adjusting controls, or checking your phone become more difficult. And more dangerously, you can completely miss your wife calling your name for the last 30 seconds. But Quest 3 has done a good job managing that. You can activate the pass-through mode and see your surroundings by just double tapping the headset. And the pass-through mode also opens the door to something that can take immersion to the next level: mixed reality. That means you can see your real hand and the real steering wheel, while everything else is fully immersed in the virtual world. When it's set up properly, the blend between real and virtual can feel incredibly convincing, and it's something no monitor setup can truly replicate.
And this is the most immersive thing I ever had in sim racing.
So the conclusion is, when it comes to immersion, VR is simply unbeatable. Okay, after all this, back to the original question. Should you choose VR or ultrawide? I know it's a cliche, but the answer is, it depends. If you want the most immersive, space-saving and cost-effective setup, VR is the winner. It puts you inside the car in a way no monitor can truly match. But if you just want something that's easy to set up, more comfortable and simply easy to live with day to day, then ultrawide is the better choice. You just sit down, turn it on and start racing. No headset on your face, no heat build-up, no motion sickness to worry about. So to simplify, it comes down to this. If you want a maximum immersion, go VR. If you want a maximum comfort and convenience, go ultrawide. For me personally, even after getting the 57-inch ultrawide, I still spend most of my time racing in VR, simply because I just can't give up the level of immersion. Of course, this comparison isn't over yet. We're still missing the triple screen setup. So if you want to see VR versus ultrawide versus triples, let me know in the comments. And thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.